Hey, it's Miss Kelly Michelle. Welcome back to my channel. We have our rental revenue builders collaborators here, right? We have another show for you guys, and today we are going to be talking about buying criteria. And we're talking about buying criteria from a lot of different aspects because we all have different experiences and different types of real estate investing that we focus on. Buying criteria is very important because it helps you from the beginning structure how you want to invest and what investments to go after. So establishing your buying criteria upfront is basically the first thing you need to do after you decide what type of real estate investing you want to focus on. Our last show, we talked about how you need to pick one way of investing in real estate. So pick one way to go about doing it, and then maybe later on venture out into other aspects of real estate investing. But first, let's just pick that one way. And after you pick that one way, then we need to establish our buying criteria. We're going to start from the aspect of, I would say, wholesaling. We're going to start with you, Marlon, because you are the person who finds these discounted properties. When you are looking for properties for your investors, how do you establish the buying criteria, or do they give it to you? How does that all work?
It's based off a conversation with the person that's actually looking for the property. So we're trying to find out as much information as we can, because our job as wholesalers is to mirror what the buyer's doing. So if the buyer's buying with cash, then our approach is with cash. If they're using hard money, then we need to know that as well, because we try to get educated on the finances that are available for the buyer. Because when we go talk to the seller, we need to find out, do they need 30 days? Do they need 60 days? Whatever their financial situation is now our financial situation. So we need to know what areas they want to be in, what price range they want to be in. And it really comes down to, where's the money? Where's the money coming from? Because again, our conversation with the seller is the exact same conversation that we're going to have with the buyer. If they want a 3-bedroom in a certain neighborhood, then that's what we're going to. Having a criteria is probably the most important thing that you can have, because it sets us off on a path that maybe other people aren't set off on. So again, if you have a realtor, they're going to bring deals back to you. But as a wholesaler, we're looking to find out what you're looking for, so we can usually put these houses on the contract. Because if we're not selling them to you, we're trying to sell them to somebody else. But having that criteria set up in the beginning makes a world of difference.
Okay, so have you ever had a situation like working with, let's just say, a buyer who did not give you accurate criteria, or there was a problem, I guess, because they didn't give you great buying criteria? Have you ever had that situation?
Especially in the beginning. So in the beginning, it was kind of, let's get everything under contract and see if we can actually do something with it, which leaves you in a position where you got to hustle twice as hard just to try and get the property off. And then so I had a situation one time where somebody just came and said, "Hey, I'm looking for a rental property. Just find me anything. I'll be ready for it." So come to find out that their financial wasn't together. At the end, when you sent them the property, they wasn't really set up to manage it. They wasn't, they didn't just anything. Nothing was together. We didn't ask the right questions in the beginning, and then so I ended up basically putting the house on the contract, and I put a bigger earnest money down than I normally would, because I knew, hey, this guy's gonna buy it. I put down, I think, $1,000 just to get the deal, and at the end of the day, I couldn't find a buyer because the numbers were off. Because again, I thought they was paying a little bit more than what normal people was, and it turned out that they had a hard money lender that they were trying to go through from an out-of-state situation that wasn't even a legit hard money lender. So having that criteria set up, having us know that if you need a bank financing or whatever, it just allows us to set up the deal beforehand, because we want to mirror exactly what you're doing. Like, our job is just to mirror. I mean, if you say, this is what I got, this is what we're going to take as our grain of salt. I mean, our established, conversation with the seller, and it's going to make our deal go a lot smoother.
All right, cool. Thank you for that, Marlon. Now that Marlon has told us from the wholesaler perspective, he talked about funding and hard money lending. Next, we're going to go to Alejandro. Alejandro does some hard money lending. That's part of what he does in real estate investing. Whenever somebody's bringing you a deal, what buying criteria are you looking at in order to fund that deal?
Primarily, the first thing that I want to look at is the asset. What is the collateral? What is the house? What is the property? Whatever it is that they want to purchase, and to ensure that they've done their numbers right. And that's where a lot of what Marlon was saying makes total sense, because when they're looking at that property, you want to know that you're paying the right price for it. And oftentimes, if you don't have the experience, you will overpay. And that's why that formula that everyone has to learn, that is when you're going to rehab, you have to think 70% of the after repair value minus construction costs. So you should not pay more than that. So so if it's $100,000, 70,000 is going to take you another 20,000 to fix it. So you shouldn't offer more than 50K. That they have to know that. Now, on top of that, I have to know that your rehab budget is realistic. If I go into your house, because I will typically walk that property, I would say hard money lender that's local, somebody like me funding out of their own money, or they have a few partners, any hard money lender worth their weight is going to walk the property if it's the first time doing a deal with you. After a couple of times, you get a working relationship, you can trust that person's judgment. But if I walk in that house and I'm asking you, oh, what are you going to do here? That's the other thing. I'm going to ask you, what are you planning to do here? Oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I can tell by what they're telling me whether or not it's going to be $20,000 or $30,000. And oftentimes, if you think you're going to do a kitchen for $1,000 and you're going to redo the kitchen, I know you don't know what you're talking about. Or do you hear that? Oh, that deck's it's going to be only like $500, and you got to redo a deck. No, that's $5,000. So you have to look at what is the price you're paying, and then are you realistic on how much it's going to cost you? And we're in a situation right now where construction costs and labor have increased substantially. So I'm also going to ask you, who is the GC? Are you going to do it? If you're going to do it, have you done this before? So one of the things that you need to do if you're going to use hard money is you need to have as much of that homework done. And sometimes a good wholesaler can give you that. Marlon's a straight up guy, so he can tell you that. There's a lot of wholesalers that'll just tell you, oh man, yeah, $200,000 after resale value. It only needs $5,000 worth of work because they're trying to get it off. So you need to do your homework and understand, how much is it going to take this? Is it going to take to get this over the finish line? Because the more prepared that you are, the better. A hard money lender, though, too, can be a coach, because if you get turned down, if I turn you down, sometimes that's a good thing, because you can learn from a hard money lender. If I'm saying I'm not going to give you the money, that means you didn't do your homework, or you don't know exactly what your costs are, and that can help you a lot too. So it's not that we don't want to give the money, it's just that we want a win-win situation. The hard money lender doesn't. I'm not in the business of taking people's houses. That's not what I want to do. I'm good getting my interest and my points so that we both can eat. But those are the things I look at primarily. And then obviously the other thing is, just quickly, is on those costs, just their capacity. Can they bring this through? Something about the character. Do you return my calls? Do you return my texts? Are you keeping me updated even on the deal? All those things make a big difference. Even if your numbers look right, just the ability for you to show up with your capacity and your character is huge as well.
And I'm glad you said that, because that is a big deal, because dealing with the right person who will communicate with you, that's a big deal, because you need to stay on top of what's happening on the project. If there's something going wrong, they need to let you know. If they can't pay it back within a certain amount of time that you guys agreed on, they need to communicate that and not just duck and dodge you. Those are some key points. Thank you so much, Alejandro.
I'll add that's huge in this business. What's good about it is that there's a lot of flexibility. And I've had someone who, because of his communication, because of how good he was in just maintaining contact, I let some things slide, because he told me, look, I can't get the money to you on this, but I can get it by this date. If you're willing to work with me, And I did that for him because I knew he was good for it. He had established enough of that character and enough of that consistent communication early on that I could trust him.
Yeah. So now we've talked about the wholesaling part. We've talked about the hard money part, which is financing. Let's go into the long-term rental and midterm rental criteria, because these are two different things. So Michelle and I will talk about this. And then Dominique will come to you because you are on the larger scale. So we're going to save you for last. You have the big bang there. Michelle, would you like to tell us about the buying criteria that you consider or look for in regards to long-term and midterm rentals?
So for me, the buying criteria is the same. And I say that because I want to make sure, there's a couple of other things that we do for the midterm rental side, which I know that you can touch on, but I always want to have multiple exit strategies. So I like to put my numbers low. And if the worst case scenario, Airbnb goes out of the window, midterm rentals go out of the window, which we know that's not the case. But if that's, then we always know long term. So anytime I do my assessments, I do it, what are the current comps? And when I say that, we go by an industry standard of 6 months usually, not in these days right now. Right now, you want to know what's in the last 3 months, what's the rental comps. Back to what Alejandro was saying is how I do my assessments has to be how my lender is going to look at it. We have to have the lens of the lender. So always at that 70% ARV, even if you have immaculate credit, things can shift. Right now, having an 850 credit score, one of my partners does, we usually get an 85% LTV. We're not getting those numbers right now. We're barely getting 75%. That can hurt you on your cash flow, and that can hurt you also on the long-term rental side. So you really want to, when I look at things, I look at the long-term rental, and if I know that the numbers can work, then anything I make above that on midterm rental or STR is gravy for me. Then we know that we're really cash flowing, but at least I know if I can meet that $200 to $400 cash flow, which is comfortable for me, for a single family resident, then I'll look to go, I'll go ahead and move in on that deal.
Now, one thing I want to hit on is not only do you look at the numbers, and you heard Michelle say that it's all contingent upon the financer, right? What are they going to approve? We also need to consider locations, right? That's all a part of your buying criteria. So are you going to invest in like maybe a B class neighborhood or a C class neighborhood? So when I say these types of things, like for myself, my long-term rentals are primarily in C class neighborhoods. So these are neighborhoods where they're a little bit older. The properties usually need some type of updating or, some form of a rehab, maybe a light rehab, maybe a heavy one. It depends on the property. But you're always able to get into these properties pretty low and then raise the value of them up because you've put in the work, you put in the updates and whatever work that the property may need. So that's primarily what I target. Definitely high rental areas is going to be another thing I'm looking at for long-term renting. And then, of course, looking at the rental rates and seeing if it's going to be worth it, if it's going to give me the cash flow that I'm looking for. Whenever you're going into investing into long-term rentals, you normally have to get a rent roll from the previous owner if it was occupied. Now, if it was vacant, then of course you're not going to get that. But if it's occupied, definitely get those rent rolls, which is a history of what the tenants have paid over the last, let's just say 12 months. So you can have an idea of who's in the property, what they're paying, and then also look at the current rental rates to see if there is room to raise the rent up. So that would be another part of buying criteria. So looking at the class of the neighborhood, if it's a rental area, and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm just adding that on to what Michelle just said to us. Now, when it comes to midterm rentals, basically, like Michelle said, we're going into it when you're buying a property, you're going to go into it as if you were going into a long-term rental, because ultimately that's what it could be used for if nothing else works, right? But whenever you are thinking about like maybe rental arbitrage, because that's a whole nother beast when it comes to obtaining a property, and that's for midterm or short-term rental. The buying criteria is also going to be different, right? So you're not really buying this property, but you still have to have criteria to get this property. So for midterm rentals, for me, if I'm focusing on medical professionals, then of course I'm looking at neighborhoods in the areas around those hospitals, right? Am I able to get properties under rent or for rent at the price I need them at to meet my numbers? That is really what I'm looking at. Also, now that I've expanded a little bit more into corporate and other type of people, I'm also looking at locations that are centrally located and safe. So it is going to be a suburb, and it's going to be like near a major highway. So this person can get in any direction within 15-20 minutes. They can get to wherever they need to get to and be at those places where those major corporations are, those hospitals or whatever it may be. They can get to it relatively quickly. That's just a tidbit about midterm rentals. We're going to focus on that on this call. With that, you can hear more about that in the Rental Revenue Builders membership. So you'll get more information about midterm rentals. Now, Michelle, did you want to add anything else? Oh, or was it?
I was going to, can I ask Michelle?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Michelle, I wanted you to clarify, even for people listening, because you said that your criteria was a 200 to 400 cash flow per door. Is that clear? And just for people to understand, what do you mean by that when you say 200 and 400 cash flow? Because sometimes people don't understand. Could you provide a little bit more clarity about that?
Absolutely. Good question. So it's going to be after you pay your expenses. So let's just talk about true that you're purchasing the long-term rental and you're the one that's actually on the mortgage and the deed. Once you pay your mortgage, once your insurance and tax, and typically if you have a 30-year mortgage, they're going to include all of that. You might have heard PITI. And so they're going to include all of that. Once that cost is paid for, then the $200 to $400, that is a healthy return. It sounds crazy. That's why a lot of people like getting into midterm rentals and into the short-term rentals, but you want to make sure that you can cover those costs, because the worst thing you want is that you're not able to pay your mortgage. However, lenders make sure that that's why sometimes you have to put more money out if you're not meeting a certain level, depending on what if you're going traditional or if you're going DSCR, which is another type of loan for investors. There is a threshold and cap. So you don't want to get stuck, like Marlon said, you don't want to get stuck in a situation. You rehab the house, you maybe had a hard money lender lend to you, and then you get into the financing side of it where there's no one that's going to be able to, they don't want to finance it. So you got to also really look at that as well, because right now appraisals are not coming back the way that they have in the past. So one of the things that I've been doing recently is anything that's a current comp, and I know it's going to take me 30 to 90 days to get renovated, I still do a 6% to 10% discount off of it, because I have recently got caught in the fire of my appraisals are not coming back, and it's been within 6 months. So I know it's a little bit longer into, but you have to know where you're at in your market and what season we are in when you're looking to invest. And then in regards to on the midterm rental side, just like Kelly mentioned, you're going to want to know what it costs, because it's not just your mortgage or the rent. If you're arbitraging, you have to think about the utilities, and the internet, staging the property. So there's cost in all of that, which I know Miss Kelly gets into very deep into in her membership and so forth. But that's what I meant. It's a healthy return. That's typically the average 200 to 400, meaning you have an asset and you get to have a little bit of money from cash flow.
And the maintenance, just real quick, do you hold maintenance every month, meaning, or capital expense reserves just in case?
So we call it the treasure box, the war chest. We like to hold 30%. It's a little high, but just like Miss Kelly says, I purchase in Class C as well. So my general cost is anywhere from 20 to 40,000 in renovations, which is on a lower end when you're having to do flooring and updating kitchens. So I do mine a little bit different, just because as far as I was a former contractor, I have phases in my buy and holds. What's phase one to get me the best ARV, but maybe that water heater can keep kicking for another few more months. So I have to be a little bit higher on my cost of holding and putting that away, because I will give you an example. I had a midterm rental that we got it within 60 days. The water heater went out. So that was a $750 cost that had to get inherited after everything. So yes, you want to keep money on the reserves. If you have a property management company, you got to take all that into consideration. Yeah.
All right, great. Go ahead, Marlon.
That's one of the things about, and also when you're dealing with a wholesaler, is to have these conversations, because we need to know your strategy so we can help you out in the same situation. Because by us knowing that she needs to have a $200 to $400 cash flow at the end, we can turn back our numbers when we go to negotiate with a seller, and we can find those exact numbers to where we know it'll work for her. That means that it'll work for us as well. And so knowing that, and also knowing that you have a team in place, and then again, how we can establish our place in that team helps out a lot as well. So if we know you have a property manager, we know kind of we talk to the property manager, what they're looking for, things like that. It just helps build a strategy for us in the beginning. So these conversations that you guys are having are conversations that we as wholesalers need to have as well. And the buyer the buyer probably needs to be prepared for a conversation like that.
What I will tell you is my 20 properties that I purchased last year, those 20 properties came from a wholesaler. Out of the wholesaler, I only used 2 wholesalers last year. One wholesaler had a 97% rate of closing, but because Marlon, you hit it right, he spoke with me, we had lunch. It wasn't just let me get a rat race game, because he's been in the game for a little bit. So he says, I'd rather have my quality buyers. And no, we had to build that rapport and that relationship towards the end of that portfolio. I'm like, Fernando, sight unseen, is this what it is? And I would do sight unseen and be able to sign on it, because he knew my threshold. And he knew I hated going to the competition when there's 10 other people there fighting for it in that outbidding war. So I'm like, I know you want this, but we have to start low, and this is the highest we can go. I think one of the things we have to be very cognizant as investors is not the emotional side, because sometimes we will say, instead of the 70% ARV, maybe give a little bit more threshold on the 75, 80%, because I really want that house, because Miss Kelly said it's a good area, and then that's when you get upside down, and especially with everything that's happening. So I know we're going to talk about that later, but you got to get that emotional out. I've had to walk away from some deals. I'm like, but I'm glad I did.
Yeah, and especially when you're new and you're like, I just want to get this property, I want to get in the game, but you can't be too eager. You got to wait. It's always going to be another property. Trust me, it's always going to be another deal out there. So don't rush. Take your time and don't get emotional, like Michelle just said. Thank you.
And,
Go ahead.
and the Alejandros of the world know that. When they know when you're testing to try to see if you can get that budget in and get those numbers, they smell it. And it's his money at the end of the day. They're not in the business of getting the homes. And that's when you'll start to notice, hey, if some hard money lenders are turning me down, let me reassess the criteria.
And also to Marlon's point, it's just like, when I think about wholesaling, this is not even a segment that I'm currently in, but I'm thinking about, like, obviously finding the property first, but really it's that reverse strategy, right? Mm-hmm. Building that relationship with the buyers and understanding their needs, and then going to find the properties to source for them. So all great conversation here for sure.
And most wholesalers only have a handful of people they deal with. Like, I probably sold 95% of most of my deals to 3 or 4 people. And so that relationship is and that's because I had lunch with each one of them. We sat down, and they were willing to share their business plan with me. So now I'm not guessing anymore. I am the buyer. That's what I go to other wholesalers to get deals, because I know their criteria so well that now I come in and they look at me as the individual buyer. So their relationship always helps out.
And
Yeah,
I've
going through that, sorry, constantly having that conversation, because like I said, the wholesaler had a 97% success rate last year, but he hasn't called me this year. But my strategy has changed this year. And if he would be able to find that buyer's box still for me, we would buy. We're not out of the season of buying. We're just being a little bit more selective. But I definitely, I didn't buy all over San Antonio, Texas. I bought within a certain zip code for, last year, but my whole strategy has changed. So to wholesalers or people starting, you have to constantly keep that relationship, because other investors pivot. I'm moving and segmenting into Dom's world of multifamily, but doesn't mean I'm going to leave single family. Miss Kelly, everyone has a different strategy. So if you're wanting to be successful as a wholesaler, you have to keep constantly with those relationships, because as we continue to grow our portfolio, so does our buying, our buyer's box, so you will.
And I mean, I just have to add, Kelly, you started a great conversation with this, but often in the beginning, people think, and it can happen. I'm not saying that it's prescriptive, but a lot of times when you watch social media and you have someone, oh, I can make you a millionaire in the next 6 months. And that can happen, but it's very few people.
Right.
What you see here is, Kelly, I've known you more than 10 years. Marlon, I've known you more than 10 years. You've probably known Dom and Michelle for some time. And what it takes is you have to get out there and build a reputation. You have to get out, go to your local meetups, follow up with people. I think that's the piece that often we forget about. You can know all the technical things. You can even know a lot of the plumbing and carpentry, but the relationship skills, how to network, how to follow up with someone, how to be professional in your communication, how to start a conversation and keep a relationship, that's one of the most important skills, I believe, in real estate. And it's going to take you out of your comfort zone. A lot of times people, they may be introverts, or they don't want to go out at night, because these real estate meetups are usually Wednesday night, Thursday night. You're going to have to go to them to meet the wholesalers, or to create the relationships where people can begin to trust you. Because even in marketing and sales, they know that it takes like a 5 or 6 touches before somebody buys. Why does Russell Brunson send you an email every day? Is what I say, because he says eventually you're going to buy from him, because you begin to trust Russell, because he emails you every day. And I believe that in this business as well, relationships and getting in front of someone, maintaining that contact is essential.
That is a great point. Thank you. Let's switch over to Dom, and let's talk about the commercial real estate multifamily side of things. What is your buying criteria on that side of real estate investing?
Yeah, I think I will kind of piggyback off of kind of the points that you actually honed in on. Always having kind of like an exit strategy in mind, and also asset class as well, right? So when you're thinking about asset classes, am I buying in an A class neighborhood, a B class, or a C class? You really want to have these things in mind, because in real estate, trust me, you always want to have that exit piece in mind. When I actually look at deals, before I even look at the numbers of the deal, I first want to understand, hey, what are my key metrics that I want to look at, right? So a key tool that I use all the time is called Neighborhood Scout. This is a very good tool to understand, hey, what type of neighborhood am I investing in? You might come across a deal with, hey, this high 15% cap rate, right? And it's cash flowing amazingly. And it may be in a rough neighborhood where you might have some trouble getting out of that deal. So I tend to really stick towards B and C class neighborhoods, even though I'm paying a little bit more per door. I like, basically the security in, hey, I'm in a mobility zone where there's low poverty, right? There's low crime. And I'm able to identify these key metrics through Neighborhood Scout just by looking at the crime index in the area. So on a scale of 0 to 100, right? With 100 being obviously, the best, and 0 being the worst, like, is this area, a 50 benchmark? So a 50 would be like, hey, this is a pretty safe, safe neighborhood, right? I'm looking at the average rents year over year. Are the rents increasing or decreasing versus the rest of the United States, right? So that's another key metric that I'm looking at when I'm looking into apartment buildings. And then also I'm looking at appreciation year over year in this specific zip code, right? Is this property appreciating the way it should be versus the rest of the United States? And then one of the biggest things that I look at as I wrap up, I look at the unemployment rate, right? So in this specific neighborhood, what is the unemployment rate versus the rest of the United States? This is going to tell you the story about the class that you're investing in, and then you drill down to the numbers, right? So when I'm looking at the numbers, I'm looking at, hey, off top, how much equity am I walking into the deal with, right? I'm looking at, if I'm purchasing a property at $300,000, this property needs to be worth at least maybe 15 to 20% more, right? I need to walk in with equity, just to really hedge against inflation and also hedge against maybe the market takes a 10%, downturn, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm also looking at the cap rate. In the Midwest, typically prior to the high interest rates, we were looking at a 7% cap rate. But now, with interest rates increasing at 7-8%, if your cap rate on your property is 7%, you're really not making much money, right? So if your interest rate is higher than the cap rate on that specific multifamily asset, then you may really want to kind of just redial those numbers or move on to the next deal because it's probably not healthy for you. And then lastly, guys, it's really obviously appreciation. And then, I'm just really looking at the overall numbers of the deal. So that's really how I kind of determine the criteria of how I kind of just go to market and invest in my deals. And literally that's my strategy.
So what's the ideal cap rate now?
Right now, it just depends on what market. So specifically in Los Angeles, you're looking at a 4 to 5% cap rate, right? High appreciation, low cap rate. Specifically in the Midwest, you're really looking at a 9% would be a decent cap rate to snatch a multifamily asset.
I know we're all interested in commercial real estate. I haven't gotten into it yet, but it's in the future. It's a plan. Got to work my plan. That's all it is. One thing I want to point out is when we're talking about these classes of the neighborhoods, it's 4 different classes if you guys don't know. So there's an A class, which is very nice neighborhood, usually high end. B is more of your middle class neighborhood, still nice and decent. C is what we explained, an older neighborhood, the properties may need some updating or rehabbing. D is going to be your troubled neighborhoods. Those are going to be the neighborhoods where you see a lot of vacant properties, it's ran down, lower poverty levels are in those areas. So there are going to be challenges if you get into D class. Not to say you can't invest in those areas, but you're definitely going to have to take some measures to protect your rehab. And then even with C class, you still have to take some measures as well, because I've had that experience of having my pipes and copper stolen in my C class neighborhood. So there's still some measures to take, but definitely keep those things in mind. I do want to thank you guys for sharing your buying criteria. Now, we go into more information and the foundations of buying criteria in the rental revenue membership. We do have a training in there that talks all about buying criteria and these classes. It breaks it down for you. It talks about the cap rate, return on investment, all of those things. So we're about to go ahead and we're going to wrap it up because we're going into our after show. And our after show is going to be us telling our stories about the worst experience we had when we did not establish our buying criteria and the best experience we had as far as our investments when we did establish that criteria. So if you want to hear the after show, make sure you join the Rental Revenue Builders membership. Thank you guys for listening to us today and tuning into our video. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we will be back with you next month with another video about real estate investing and how we can lead you to building your rental portfolio and building your net worth. All right, talk to you guys later. Bye.